During this season of Lent, we're going to focus on a movement known as neighboring. It uses that oft-word used neighbor as a verb, suggesting that there is more to being a neighbor than living in proximity to another person. For the next several weeks, the sermons will invite us to explore what that means. In addition to the sermons, several of the Sunday school classes are working with the material that I'm working with, and so they'll be discussing that on their part. In addition, we have some small group studies Wednesday evening and Sunday evening that are addressing related topics. Part of the reason we're doing this is that last fall, our church council decided to enroll in the Good Neighbor experiment. We're one of several churches in the Wichita area that are part of it, and the way that works is several members of each of those churches meet together for quarterly retreats. They're given some homework, and then they come back and meet again. What our team has been learning is causing us to rethink how we do things and why we do things. So we decided to broaden the audience and to invite you to participate in this experiment, if for no other reason than to let you know what it is that we're learning. Now, I know that some of it is just common sense. Much of it is stuff we know we ought to be doing already. But we also know that most of us can find several good excuses for not doing what we know we should do. In that sense, we're no different than Jesus, who finds himself in the wilderness, being tempted to find a shortcut. Hear now the gospel lesson as told by Mark in the first chapter. About that time, Jesus came from Nazareth of Galilee, and John baptized him in the Jordan River. While he was coming up out of the water, Jesus saw heaven splitting open, and the Spirit, like a dove, coming down on him. And there was a voice from heaven, "You are my Son, whom I dearly love. In you I find happiness." At once the Spirit forced Jesus out into the wilderness. He was in the wilderness for 40 days, tempted by Satan. He was among the wild animals, and the angels took care of him. After John was arrested, Jesus came into Galilee, announcing God's good news, saying, "Now is the time. Here comes God's kingdom. Change your hearts and lives and trust this good news." The word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. Amen. I just love that image of Jesus in the wilderness with the wild animals around and the angels caring for him in the midst of that. I guess I love that because I think there are wild animals all around us, all the time. Danger seems to be lurking around every crevice and every corner. Everywhere we turn, it seems to be dangerous. And like Jesus, we are hoping the angels will be there to protect us and to care for us. Except sometimes I wonder if we're not the ones who are called to be the angels who protect our neighbors from the wild animals. Dave Runyon tells the story of how he and a group of pastors in Denver met to talk about their community and how they might address the needs of their community. And they listed some of the needs in their community, and they sound like the same kind of list that you would draw up in any city of any size. There were things like poverty and unemployment, at-risk youth and school dropout rates, violence and limited low-income housing, just to name a few of them. Those are the wild animals of the urban environment. And these pastors wondered, how can we be those angels that care for the people who live in that setting. They were a little bit chagrined when it was the city manager who gave them their answer, because the city manager said, all you need to do is what Jesus told you to do: love your neighbor as yourself. Not some abstract neighbor, your next door neighbor. Love that neighbor as yourself. But if you don't know your neighbor, how can you love your neighbor? Neighboring is a movement that's helping us learn how to get to know our neighbors and to become a good neighbor. If you look at the cover on the bulletin that we printed this morning, you'll see a picture with a heart in the middle of houses. It is an attempt to draw a map of sorts, reminding you of the 8 front doors that are closest to your own front door. So imagine the place you live as being where that heart is, and there are 8 neighbors that are the closest to you. Now, some of them may be behind your house. Some of them may be across the street from your house. If you live in an apartment building, they may be down the hallway from you. If you live out in the country, there may be miles between you. But it does not matter where you live. There are 8 people whose front door is closest to your front door. And we want to get to know those 8 people, those 8 neighbors who have access to the same common space between your houses. The first step in neighboring is to figure out who those 8 people are. I'm going to encourage you to get to know them on 3 different levels. First, I want you to know their name. Some of you may already know that. Then I want you to know something about them that you can't tell by looking. I mean, there's a difference between knowing they drive a blue car and she's a pharmacist. And then I want you to know them at a level that knows and understands their yearnings and their longings. Now, obviously, you can't just do that by looking in the phone book or watching them down the street. It's going to involve a conversation. And my guess is it will take more than one conversation. In fact, I think if you take this exercise seriously, it will take you months, if not years, to fully understand all 8 of those neighbors at all 3 levels. But if we don't start with a plan to do that, we'll never get it accomplished. I know for years I drove past a house that every time I drove by it, I wondered about it. It drew my attention in a strange way. Maybe you've seen one like it. It looked like it was always under construction. And it looked like they were, I don't know what they were doing. One end of the house, there was plywood that had been nailed up against some studs. Another section, it looked more like linoleum than anything else on the side of the house. It was like flooring put up right. And then another part of the house, there was this plastic brick stuff, that's shaped like bricks and painted like bricks that was curling at the edges. So I don't know if it was supposed to be indoor material or they didn't put it on very well. It was just one of those hodgepodges of things, and as I drove by it, I wondered if they were just building with the materials they could afford. And then I began to wonder if they just didn't have a plan and they were just doing whatever felt good at the moment and tried this out and then they tried that out and they'll never get it finished. That house comes to my mind periodically and haunts me because I know it's easy to start a new thing and forget what you're doing. It's why so many New Year's resolutions are already lost and forgotten by the middle of February. That's why I showed you the bulletin. I want you to have a reminder of your plan. I've also got another tool for that. The ushers will be handing that out now. I want you to have 2 of these. One we're going to practice with. The other I want you to put on your refrigerator door, on your refrigerator when you get home. I'm going to give these to the choir to pass out. Thank you, Debbie. While they're handing those out, let me give you some instructions. Like the cover of your bulletin, these sheets can be used as a map of sorts. Clarence, I got those already. It's okay. In the middle of the map is your home, and around it are your 8 neighbors that are closest to you. Again, they may not be in that particular shape, but this draws a map for you of your 8 neighbors. And I'm asking you to fill this out. Put it on your refrigerator and keep it there. Fill it out and put down under A, their name. Under B, something you know about them that you can't tell by looking. And under C, something about their yearnings or their longings. What we're going to do with your other sheet is to practice. Because I think neighboring in many ways is a mindset. So, think about your map now as the pew where you're sitting. Where you are sitting is in the middle, and there are 8 people near you. Well, some of them are further away than other places, but there's 8 people around you. I want you to think about who are those 8 people? And do I know their name? Do I know something about them that you can't tell by looking? Do I know something of their yearnings? And if you don't, I'm going to ask you to have a conversation and to fill out maybe just 1 block, or if you know more than one person, 2 blocks, and have conversations. I'm going to give you 3 minutes. I don't ever take my phone into church, but I have it with me today so I could set the alarm. I'm going to set the alarm. Let's see, where is that alarm? Somewhere. There it is. I'm going to set the alarm for 3 minutes.
We don't have our papers.
You may need some papers over here, Clarence. Have a conversation and fill out these sheets with the neighbors as a way of practicing with your neighbors at home. Ready? Start. Ten, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay. This is the danger of letting people talk during this sermon. Thank you. It's still straight. Thank you for allowing me to encourage you to try an experiment. But I know some of you are wondering why. Why do we need to get to know one another? Why should we get to know our neighbors, especially in church where I already know those people? Some of you found out, maybe you don't. Why? I mean, I come home from work, you may be saying, and I have spent all day with people. I just want to be alone. That's why I built a nice little deck on the back of my house, so I could have some peace and quiet. Why should I interrupt that peace and get to know my neighbor? Well, aside from the admonition of Jesus that I referred to earlier, there are some significant beneficial side effects of neighboring. I don't know if any of you watched the video that Bev referred to last week, the TED Talk video. A couple people did. If you haven't yet, it is connected to our Facebook page. If you want to find it, we can get it to you. In that talk, Susan Pinker speaks about the factors that lead to longer and healthier lives. The number one factor, according to her research, is social interaction. The number one factor for longer and healthier lives is social interaction. And it's not just her research that suggests that. A study at BYU showed that that loneliness increases the risk of death by 26%. Loneliness. Meanwhile, State Farm, the agency that says they're like a good neighbor, has done some research and found that while most people think it's important to be a good neighbor, only 16% of men and only 11% of women have invited their neighbors to a social event. Why neighbor? Because it's good for you, and it's good for your neighbors. And it will make the place you live a better place to live. Now, I don't know if any of you have watched those reality TV shows that are based on real estate. There's one of them where they go buy a house and they flip it. There's another one where they offer to upgrade a house or to buy a new house. And in all those houses, they talk about the things in the house. None of them talk to their neighbors. And yet, when you ask people about where they live, the thing they like most is the neighborhood and their neighbors. It's what makes it a good place to live. I think if we want our church to become a place to call home in the Westlink neighborhood, we need to learn how to be good neighbors in the neighborhoods where we live. To begin with a new mindset as we interact with the people we've not yet met. It may also be a practical response to school shootings. You see, neighboring is a means of changing our culture and maybe changing our culture away from violence to something else. I can't promise it will prevent the next school shooting, but I am convinced it will help reduce the likelihood that it will happen in our neighborhoods, because we will be a people who care for and care about one another. We will become the angels that care for our neighbors when the wild animals of society come to prey. And they may become the people who give thanks to God. May it be so. Amen.